Well, all right. Kicking off this webinar today, I'm Zach Terrell. I'm the general manager here at Stellar WP and specifically here at LearnDash. And I've got Jack Kittering with me today. Jack is our product manager on LearnDash. So he makes all of the decisions and all the strategies around where LearnDash is going as a product and what customer solutions we're going to build. So Jack and I wanted to share really more of a kind of an insight to a conversation he and I had a few weeks ago. Jack has really added OpenAI and ChatGPT in particular to his workflow and the way he's thinking about being a product manager. And how he goes about prototyping and thinking about solutions for customers and things that he might have annoyed one of our developers with a little bit of back and forth and experimentation over weeks, and he can now annoy an AI instead. So I'm going to have Jack first demo one of these plugins that he built specifically for LearnDash, purely in conversation with ChatGPT. And then he and I are going to just go through the conversation he had with ChatGPT that led to the creation of this plugin. And we're going to try to do that for two different plugins that he's built, just to kind of give an insight on that and a little bit of creative thinking about how we're doing a little bit of product prototyping these days. Personally, I was blown away when I first had this conversation with Jack, and I hope that all of you who tuned in will also be kind of excited to see some of these interesting ways that Jack's working these days.
Thank you, Zach. Hello, everyone. I'm going to walk you through one of the first plugins I come up with ChatGPT that was around custom course tabs. So for a long time, we had people like, hey, how can I just add another tab to my LearnDash course? And there's some code hanging out there around, our developer docs that's like, hey, you can take this code, you can put it in functions PHP and you create a tab. But most people aren't at a technical level where they want to keep messing around with child themes and functions PHP. They're like, maybe ChatGPT can build us a plugin that allows us to dynamically add these tabs. And so me and ChatGPT, we went back and forth over a bit, and then it actually come up with a working plugin for these custom tabs, which I was both impressed with and surprised with, because when you use OpenAI for the first time, you get back responses and you're like, well, this doesn't make any sense, or well, this doesn't work as I expected it to. But then as you get to grips with it, you realize that, oh, actually this stuff does work.
You're so much pickier than I am, Jack. Like my experience was different. I've been excited about every weird conversation I've had with ChatGPT, but this seems to be what unlocked it for you.
Yeah, this really unlocked it for me, and I think what unlocked it for me was really ChatGPT 4. Like ChatGPT 3.5 for coding purposes was going absolutely nowhere. Like it just flat out 9 times out of 10 did not work as you'd expect it to work. You'd get back snippets that made no sense. You'd get back code that didn't work. You'd get back made up function names. But ChatGPT 4 understands LearnDash as a plugin. Like it can pull out from the developer docs information. Obviously only up to 2021 when its training data cut off. But yeah. It has that data in there. You can ask it to explain a function that I know we added in 2021. It can explain it, it can build it, and it can do all that kind of cool stuff. So I'm going to share my screen with you all.
We'll talk some more about that 2021 limitation when we go through the second plugin, because there's a fun little discovery there.
Yeah, there really is. So I'm going to share. Zoom is messing up with my screen share, which is wonderful. Let's try this way. Oh, sorry. I just need to enable in system preferences because Zoom.
Yeah, while you're doing that, Tom in the sidebar mentions that hallucinations being a real challenge. And that's definitely a piece that was very prevalent in 3.5 is still a challenge in 4 sometimes, where you have to stop the AI and be like, is that a real thing? Is that function actually a function, or are you making that up? And it is kind of funny when it will apologize and be like, yeah, that really wasn't a thing. I'm sorry.
Okay, is my screen showing?
It is, yeah. Did you want to demo the plugin first?
I do, yeah. I was in the wrong
Yeah.
one.
No, that's great.
Yeah, so this is the admin of the plugin that ChatGPT built. And so we're clear, ChatGPT built the entire thing. I didn't modify any code myself manually. ChatGPT done everything. All I did was copy and paste in the code editor and compress it into a plugin file. And so, first of all, ChatGPT registered this new sub admin menu item called custom tabs. And then it built out this admin interface. So we have the title of our tab, the icon that's going to be used, the content of our tab, and then the option to edit and delete. So if we open up any of our tabs that we currently got there, and love it when it breaks on me straight away, let's use this one. So if we open up this tab, we can see we've got our title, we've got our icon, we've got our content area here, which is where our content, and then that is what shows up in the tab itself on the front end. So if I switch over to the front end of the site, you can see now that we've got our normal course tab that we're all familiar with, and it has our course content in, it has our course description, obviously, if we got one, and on this particular site, I don't have materials set up. If we did, we'd see the materials tab. But then in this tab 6, I got my test 5 content, and you can see that's what I got here. And if I update that to be like I LearnDash and save that change, you'll actually see that when I refresh this, I go back to tab 6 and I got my updated content. So it works really well. Obviously, there's improvements that can be made to it. Like, I didn't go back and forth with ChatGPT over days. This was literally built over the span of like about 15, 20 minutes, just going back and forth with ChatGPT on some stuff. And so
yeah, exactly. And that's always been, I mean, just for context, and we'll look at the code here a little bit in a minute, but this is code that, to do this the way, kind of our style of product development, you would have written detailed specs for an engineer. That would have taken you, you're a very fast spec writer, but a normal product manager might have taken them an hour to get a good spec that they felt like was thorough enough to hand off to an engineer. They had handed that off to the engineer. The engineer may have written it over, let's say optimistically 2 hours. They create something, could be a half a day. Then you're probably going to have a back and forth with that engineer to tweak a few things you didn't think about in the spec, or that when you saw in the final result wasn't exactly what you wanted. Let's say the overall effort to build something like this is probably 8 hours, and it would be spanned over multiple days just to hit everybody's schedules and
Yep.
Not overwhelm our team, make sure it met their other priorities. So 15 minutes prototype versus 8 hours of effort across multiple days, like pretty impressive result. You can see why I showed up to our one-on-one and said, all right, Jack, let's dig into this conversation you had with ChatGPT a little bit closer, because I want to know how you did 8 hours of work in 15 minutes. Let's talk about this.
Right, yeah. And so let's dive into that conversation with ChatGPT. So for some frame of reference, like before we got to this plugin, I played around with ChatGPT on and off, found out different prompts and different ways of it working, what it can do. And so I gave ChatGPT the challenge of, hey, we want to build a WordPress plugin that allows people to add custom tabs to their LearnDash course. And you can see that in the initial prompt, I'm telling it, one, that I want it to use PHP 7.4, and I want it to add a namespace. So I'm already telling it like, hey, these are the basic coding standards that we're going to use. I'm telling it what I want the name to be for the admin menu. So I want it called custom tabs. And I'm telling it that in that page, I want it to show the option to update and add a new tab. And then I'm telling it when I click add a new tab, these are the things I expect to be there. So I'm also telling it how that actually displays in the content. And then what I do is I give it our custom code from our developer docs. So I literally just went to developers.learndash.com, found the filter that we needed, copy and pasted that into the prompt, and told ChatGPT, hey, this is how we add a custom tab in LearnDash. And so
yeah, so you started it off with a little bit of a head start because you searched the docs for some stuff for it.
Yeah, I searched the docs for it to just be like, hey, this is what we need to do. This is how it's going to work. And then we can see that straight away ChatGPT goes into like, hey, this is the skeleton of the plugin. So it does everything properly based on what I told it to. So you can see that, it's given us all the information like normal, like if you was uploading the plugin to WordPress.org, it's even given us the licensing for the plugin. It's done the namespace, it's requiring it, it's initializing everything. It's creating our main class, it's adding our custom tabs. And you can see one really interesting thing is when you tell ChatGPT to build a skeleton for a plugin, it will do this first of all, where it'll be like, hey, here's our functions that work for this plugin, and we'll fill this in later. So when you do initially use ChatGPT for this sort of stuff, some people panic and like, oh, I don't have any of the function stuff, but it will come based on the prompts you give it. And it's only doing that because I told it to build a skeleton. So you can see that then it's like, hey, because this function here in the skeleton, the display custom tabs page, is actually then going to walk us through what we need to do to expand that function. So it's then going to be basically saying, hey, replace this emptiness with this complete function. And so we're going back and forth, and then you can see I'm like, hey, can you continue? Because you get our
yes, this is right. This is that classic, like it runs out of the ability to output enough, or it gets stuck. And so continue ends up being a pretty key word for anybody who's doing this kind of stuff, because you're going to run up against that ChatGPT limit of output.
And then what I found was sometimes when you use continue, it like starts from a different area. So what can be really useful then, which I learned later on, was to actually quote back at it like the last line. So I would like literally just copy this, display the custom comment, and then put continue with that in brackets. And then it would know that it's got to continue from that area, as opposed to just being like, oh, I'm just going to tell you the same thing again and run out of space again. So then you can see that it goes through, it continues, it displays our forms, adding the new tabs, does everything we need. Then it adds the custom tabs based on the user input. It adds everything we need there. And then I was like, yeah, great. It works. Like 100% legitimately works as a plugin. So all it literally took, as you can see, to get an initial working plugin was 2 prompts. An initial prompt to tell it like, this is the thing we need. A prompt to tell it to continue because it ran out of space. And then it got me a fully working plugin. But then when it builds a WordPress plugin, what ChatGPT doesn't always do is like display things in the WordPress way. So, like the WP list table, which is that UI of actually being like the classic WordPress post table where you can like edit, delete stuff, update stuff. And I'm like, okay, yeah, it looks great. But now I want the WordPress admin UI to look like if you look at a post or a page. It should be the same for the tabs. It's just like, sure, we can do that. So it tells me about a WP list table class. It walks me through it. It tells me, hey, add this, create a custom list table class inside the folder. It gives me all the content that I need for it to display as it should. It gives me all the content to update the tabs so they can be updated. And then you can see here is where I use that, hey, please continue from now the custom tabs piece, which is here.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it continues a bit more. It explains it. Now I'm like, this is just confusing now because you stopped. So I'm like, hey, provide the full.
Clearly I'm missing something, right?
Like clearly something's missing here. So then a real good prompt to tell ChatGPT if you're working with code is like, please provide me the full file with the name of the file that it's working on. When you do that, it will just start from the very top and be like, yeah, sure, here's the complete file you need. So as you can go through it, it gives me the full file and I'm like, hey, please continue from add custom tabs based. And it's like, sure, here's the continuation. So it continues exactly from where it should left off. And then it's like, that's the full file. I was also like, okay, great, that works, but now I want to be able to delete the tabs on a per tab basis.
And this is the classic situation where if you're working with a dev, they would have delivered this plugin to you and you'd have been like, okay, I forgot to mention that we need to delete a tab. Now you need to go back. This sort of thing that adds a lot of, wall clock time to an effort like this.
Yeah, this is the sort of thing where it adds a lot of back and forth with the devs. And it's also like where it helps you though, especially in product, like manage the assumption of what's going on. Because I could have easily have made the assumption that, like, hey, if I give this to a senior level engineer, you guys know I wanted to go out to delete a tab. But then you could also change that assumption.
Right.
Be like, well, if a junior's looking at it, would they have recognized that assumption? Should I be clear in what I'm doing? So ChatGPT actually helps you, because ChatGPT is literally just taking what you say and doing it. So if you're not telling it to like delete a tab, it's not going to delete a tab.
It's not going to make that philosophical leap.
Yeah, it's not going to make that connection and be like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. So, you tell it to delete the tab, it adds all that into it, it adds all the handling action. And then I'm like, hey, can you see an image if I provide one? Because I was just curious what it would answer with, which was really because I wanted it styled in a certain way. And it's like, hey, if you could understand this image, it'd be way quicker than me typing this out. And I was like,
typing out CSS, like this is how I want it to look. That's a much more challenging kind of thing to do in text.
Yeah, it's difficult to explain it, like how you want it to look. And it's like, I can't understand it as an AI language model. I'm like, okay, that's legit. But I'm like, hey, when you click on this, I only want it to output the area when you click add new, because before it had it all on one page. I was like, I want it to work like a normal WordPress, like you click add new, it opens up a page, you can add some content, you save the content, it's published. It's like, yeah, you can achieve this, just modify the current class. And so it tells me everything that I need. I'm like, yeah, but now you broke it. And this is pretty common with ChatGPT, though it's also common with developers. Like as you go back and forth, you make a change, something breaks, you go back and forth, you debug it a bit. And I'm like, hey, it's not saving. And it's like, oh yeah, because we missed a code to actually handle the saving function. So it takes me through it. And what's really interesting is you can see throughout, because I told it to follow WordPress coding standards and I told it to follow PHP 7.4, it does all the sanitization of the text fields and everything that it should do, which ChatGPT 3.5 never did. Even if you told it to do sanitization, it done it wrong.
I also noticed it's translating all your strings and doing proper, translation handling as well, which, is a very challenging thing to get right, even for our devs to remember, on a first draft prototype to do that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Normally on a first draft prototype, we won't be translatable. Like we'll go back.
Why would you bother? Right. It's just you're going fast, but ChatGPT is like, well, you need it. I'll do all that too.
Exactly. And so it goes through. It's like, hey, you can add the form. And I was like, yeah, great, this works. But now I want the user to have the ability to modify the tabs they added. So I want to be able to edit each part of their tab and save their changes. It's like, yeah, we can do that. This is what you need to do. So it walks us through that a bit more, gives us all the necessary code. And then you can see here, it kind of does its usual thing of running out of tokens. I'm like, hey, please continue from here. And then it follows that through. And I'm like, this is just really confusing now because you stopped, you're
stitching together a lot of code.
You're stitching together code. So I'm like, please just provide me the full modifier display custom tabs page function. It's like, okay, here is the full function for that class. So it gives me the full function. It modifies everything as needed. It's continuing along. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but now when I make a change to my tab using edit, it's actually adding it as a new tab rather than updating an existing tab. And it's like, oh, it appears that we missed a condition for handle edit tab. So it walks me through that again to update it. And I'm like, yeah, I use this code and it's still not working. So this is a classic thing with ChatGPT where it's really useful sometimes to quote its own code back to it, because what it's not great at doing is like understanding what it previously wrote. So it will come up with like, hey, yeah, you can fix it like this. And you're like, okay, but you didn't give me that code originally in the first place. So quoting back its code, it lets it look at its code and be like, oh, yeah, I made a mistake here. It's like, you can see out here. It's like, apologies for the oversight. I see the issue. the nonce action is completely wrong that I gave you. Like, update this with this, and you can see it's just really dumb at the end. It had the add custom tab nonce for the edit action instead of the edit custom tab nonce. So when it was running, it was just adding it as a new tab. And we went through and I was like, yeah, great, that works. And I was like, but now I want it to look like the standard WordPress post editor. And it's like, yeah, we can include a classic editor, scripts and styles, make it look like we should. And so it walks me through everything there. And then at the end, I was like, yeah, get in there. Now I want the title area to look like when you had a post in WordPress normally. It's like, yeah, we can do that. Just change this few codes, this few lines. And then that was the completed plugin now that you see working on the site.
Yeah, that's great. So this again, very interesting. You know, how does this apply? How does this apply more broadly? Now, I think for me, certainly this is like very interesting in terms of your job, but I like the idea that with a little bit of knowledge about how something works, right? You can get ChatGPT to help you with a task that would otherwise be very, very challenging or maybe even impossible for your skill level. And I'm not implying that you couldn't have written this code from scratch, Jack, but my guess is if you had tried to take on this particular thing all by yourself, it would have been much more challenging. So I think and we've got a few comments in the sidebar, while this particular webinar is not about the future of learning with OpenAI, which is a great topic, and we ought to do a webinar about that in the future. I think it does touch on that a little bit, right? It starts to think differently about, well, what kind of tasks are achievable? What kinds of things could you push a person to do that was outside their normal skill set, and learn a lot along the way through this kind of dialogue. Well, hey, I want to jump to one more example. We'll go through it much faster, but this one is a little bit recursive in its concept of you built a plugin that will use ChatGPT. Well, you used ChatGPT to write a plugin that would use the ChatGPT API to build a LearnDash course outline.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think this is the plugin I'm most excited about, is just from its core. You know, you look at this page and like, oh, it doesn't look like much, which, yeah, fair enough. You know, it's great with ChatGPT, didn't style it. It's literally just this. But what it's really good at is it will take an idea, a course name, and it will just create that course for you with an outline of lessons. So it purposely, what the plugin doesn't do is it doesn't add content to the lessons. It's purposely for an outline, because I believe that ChatGPT shouldn't be used to actually create content for a course, because as a learner, AI written content isn't at the level where it's really useful to learn from. It's like, yeah, it's okay, it's not perfect, but I believe ChatGPT can be used by LearnDash users to speed up their course creation. Like, hey, I got a loose idea, but I need some help to inspire me with content. Then this is the perfect thing. So like, if we say, I think I've already got some dummy, I just want to check my dummy content real quick before I kind of decide what I'm going to tell it to do. So I've got...
You just don't want to duplicate yourself?
Yeah, I just don't want to duplicate myself. I want it to be like brand new to show you kind of the power of what it can do. So, and for reference, by the way,
okay, hey, we got a great suggestion in the chat. Let's do a course called Community Health Nursing for Homeless.
Okay.
Let's get your caps lock key off there.
Community Health
Nursing for Homeless.
Okay. And we're going to give it 5 lessons, and then we're going to give it a prompt of like community health nursing for homeless. Maybe like a practical.
This is going to be like a course that teaches you the best practices for providing great healthcare for a homeless population. Now remember, this is a prototype. It's had no UI work done on it. This is certainly not polished, and it's not going to go into core quite like this, but it's a proof of concept anyway.
Okay, let's see what we can do. So we got a title, and we've got a number of lessons. We've got a course idea, and we'll hit create lessons. Then sometimes
again, bad UI. There isn't there's no prompt that says, "Hey, ChatGPT is working here," but trust us, it is.
So it's reloaded. So now this is the moment of truth. We're going to our courses. We've got a new course, so we can see it's done that successfully. So if we open up the builder, and we can see now that it's given us our 5 lessons for the course, which, looking at these titles, you know, understand the unique healthcare needs of the homeless population, strategies for providing culturally sensitive care to homeless individuals, building trust and establishing rapport with homeless patients, collaborating with community resources to improve health outcomes for homeless individuals, and addressing mental health and substance abuse issues in the homeless population. You know, you can argue that's a pretty decent course outline based on that idea.
Yeah,
and
yeah, for sure. Certainly not my expertise area, but you know,
yeah,
editing this course outline is a whole lot faster than maybe trying to produce it to start with.
And I think it's a really interesting way to like tackle writer's block. Like, even if you're an expert in the field, sometimes you just need a bit of inspiration to like really push, like, what content do I put in this course? And it done some really interesting stuff. So if we just take a quick look at a couple of other courses it built. So I'm big into trainers, sneakers, you Americans on the webinar. And I was like, I want a history of Nike course. Like, I want a history of Nike. Like, that's gonna be interesting for me. And it done a really interesting one where it's like, hey, the origins of Nike, the founding story, building a brand, the early marketing strategies, the design legacy, the expansion into international markets, and its impact on the sports industry and society as a whole. And like, it can do that so well. And then like,
right. And now again, it's just an outline, right? All the course materials aren't there. You know, you as the expert in the history of Nike would then need to go in and fill out that course outline, create materials, create things to read, link to resources, build quizzes, all of the sorts of things you would normally do. But at least that initial framework would be pretty strong. Yeah. So this next example this was Jack showing off to me as a big disc golf fan. He was like, "Look, I can build a class about disc golf for you to share your knowledge." I don't have a lot of knowledge. I'm not very good at disc golf, but I do like it. But this, you know, this is one that I actually can speak to. Like, this is a good outline. This is, you know, if someone went through and did the work to fill out this course material, this is an outline that's pretty strong for learning, you know, what the sport is, the basics, and then, you know, proper techniques to actually throw a disc. So pretty interesting stuff. I'm really excited about this. And so I see a few questions in the sidebar, which I think are good. Is like, well, Jack, when can other people use this? Is this a thing that's maybe someday going to be available?
Yeah, and so I think that's a good segue into and really highlighting how quick now we can prototype. So, you know, I prototyped this in like 30 minutes, going back and forth with ChatGPT over building out the idea. And this is a lot more complex than the custom tabs plugin. Like, to put that into context, like, we estimate that for one of our mid-level engineers, it probably would have taken like a week of work to take my spec and turn it into a fully functional course outline prototype in LearnDash Core. And what I managed to do was give our dev team this plugin that I built and was like, hey, let's just make it polished. Let's make it something that like looks really nice. And so if we go over to another WordPress site that I spun up and we go into courses, we now see, along with our other buttons up top here, create a course outline from AI. And this create a course outline from AI is exactly what you just saw, but nice and polished in LearnDash Core. And so we now have like a fully functional prototype of hey, this is style, this works. This uses our normal select tools. Like if you had an existing course, you could type in and select the course. If you don't, it will be like, hey, yeah, test, there's no course exists. It's a brand new course, click it, it will do it. Just enter the number of lessons in, describe the idea, hit create lessons, works exactly the same.
Yeah, I haven't actually seen it work in the product. Want to just course title of there's another nice sidebar one of elementary multiplication.
If I can spell elementary, it might be.
Let's see, that's part of the test.
Multiplication.
Multiplication, yeah.
Okay. So elementary multiplication, let's just copy that. Going to be a new course. So we're going to do 5 lessons again. And what do we want the course idea to be?
All the basics of a fundamental mathematical principle for 3rd graders.
You like coming with the difficult to spell words today.
I'm trying to trip you up, Jack.
Yeah, all the basics of a fundamental mathematical
principles for 3rd graders. So I'm mixing big words and for little kids, really mess with that. And change your 5 to 7. I like prime numbers, and let's show that it's not limited to 5 in some way.
Okay, let's do it.
I love a live demo too. Like the stakes are so high.
Well, for everyone's reference on this webinar, I've used this once. 8 minutes before this webinar started was the first time I installed this and tried it.
I know, it's perfect. This is good.
All I know we're missing is a success message when it completes. So we'll have a moment of suspense as we see, does this work? And yeah, I think there's some ways as well, just why, okay, it's done. That was suspiciously quick.
Yeah, we also probably need a redirect there, work to be done, but
yeah, exactly.
The prototype. Prototype's still strong.
Oh, so we have our course. And we have our 7 lessons.
All right, looks pretty strong. So that's a nice conclusion, I think, maybe, because I think we're right at time. Addison or Carmen could tell me if we've run over, but I think we have 30 minutes, or do we have the full hour? I don't remember.
We have the full hour.
Oh, we do. Okay, well, we can dig. So we've done this nice proof of concept. We can dig into this code as well.
Yeah, totally.
For the code heads. Let's do that.
Let's find out where it is in all my ChatGPT requests. There's a lot of conversations.
So while you find that, so we were so excited about this prototype that we will be, as Jack has hinted there with that demo and cleaned up, this particular product feature should be coming in an upcoming major release of LearnDash. I never want to commit to dates, but it's coming soon. This is features and functionality that will come to the core product very, very soon. Somebody asked about, wouldn't it be better to use your own API key? Yes, this will require you to put in an OpenAI API key, as much as we would love for everybody to just have this power absolutely for free. ChatGPT does, or OpenAI's API does cost a little bit of money. It's not that expensive. It's really, pennies on the dollar, but at scale would be very expensive for us to just give away API keys. But yeah, so if you can sign up with your own account, put in your API key, and all that functionality will be available to you. It is, and yes, it was GPT-4.
Show that real quick. We do actually have that now in the settings area of this LearnDash install over in advanced. We have a AI integrations section, which is just there, OpenAI API key right there. And to touch on kind of the price of it, like what you can expect, you can see that I've used ChatGPT extensively and gone back and forth. I've run thousands of tests using the AI on different WordPress websites. And I spent a massive $1.20 in the past month. So,
yeah, it's not high cost.
Not high cost for most people. You're literally not even going to be spending $1 a month. You're going to be spending like 10 cents maximum, probably. Like if you create a couple of courses using the outline tool, not even 10 cents. It's wildly cheap and very helpful. So this is the chat with ChatGPT to create the plugin. And so,
yeah, so let's dig into this one. I think this is really interesting from a developer standpoint and how you can use this tool. There's some really interesting lessons in here. So yeah, let's dig in.
Yeah, so I start off with the initial prompt telling it like, hey, we're creating a plugin to create a course using ChatGPT inside the WordPress admin. We're going to use, we want to create a skeleton. We're going to use PHP 7.4 and a namespace and LearnDash outline. I told it the admin pages it needed to create. I told it what we need to do with settings. I said on that settings page, we need a place for someone to put their OpenAI API key. On the main LearnDash outline page, you need a text area prompt box that can scroll and accept commands. So I told it there, which is interesting, this one, like an example of the sort of commands that I wanted to be able to take. So I told it like to expect things like, hey, create me 10 empty lessons in a course name with title 1 through 10. And I was like, that's an example command, but we need to watch out for keywords like create, lessons, topics, quizzes. I told it it needs to save it. So it walked me through the initial piece, gave me the initial code, gave me the initial piece of the API key for OpenAI, and then again told it to continue. It does this weird thing sometimes where it like doesn't realize that it's writing code, and it will just like output it as plain text, which is always interesting. And then you can see here it kind of got confused because it like started telling me that in the code piece. But then this is what's creating the ChatGPT client for actually sending and receiving the commands. So it's executing everything, going back and forth. And I'm like, yeah, please send me the command so that I can update and execute the ChatGPT that actually I need. And this is where it gets interesting. You can see initially it's like, hey, yeah, you can use the OpenAPI DaVinci Codex. So that's the older ChatGPT for those that not as familiar with what they're at. So that's like ChatGPT 3, that's the really old one. It's nowhere near as advanced as like 3.5. It's nowhere near as fast. It doesn't have as much information about it. And so that's what
at the same time, of course, it would tell you to use that API. Its knowledge ends in 2021. So exactly. It doesn't know about its own API, which is to me kind of hilarious. It doesn't actually know how to speak to itself because it is trained on a world that existed prior to itself.
Yeah, and that's the really interesting thing when you're trying to build with it, because it's like, I don't know my own code. You're like, okay. And so we're continuing, and then it's like doing all the parsing of the data, and then it's like, hey, don't forget, you're actually going to need to do this. You're going to need to refer to the LearnDash documentation to implement the methods in the code. And I'm like, no, you're going to build it. I'm not going to build it. I'm just going to tell you roughly what it is. So this is where I tell it like, hey, the LearnDash API is just a normal WordPress plugin, has a post type of SFWD courses, SFWD lessons, FSWD topics, etc. We need to take that response from ChatGPT and create the lessons in the correct post type in WordPress, including making sure we had the title and that we assign them to the correct course name. So then it's like, okay, yeah, I can do that. So it starts walking me through it a bit. This is where it's like, hey, it's creating a new course. And it's like, hey, yeah, the post title with the course name, the post content. And you can see it correctly. Remember the post type, like I told it, SFWD courses. And then I'm like, yeah, but we need to provide the course name and the number of lessons. Otherwise, we're just getting like a course title, which isn't that impressive. And it's like, yeah, you can do this. And I'm like, just stop. Like, modify the prompt box for me to include taking a course name, number of lessons, and then create that based on the output. And so it's like, okay, yeah, you can do this. This is the new outline page. This is the new execution. I'm like, please provide the full code, because otherwise it's getting crazy confusing. So again, it goes through, provides the full code. And I'm like, you stopped. And it's like, sorry for that. It's full code. And you can see here, which is really interesting, because this was before I learned like the better commands of ChatGPT. I just told it stopped. So when I told it stopped, it was like, oh, apologies for that. But it continued. It didn't continue. It just started the whole thing again. So then you know it's going to hit that limit of its token output where it's like, you're going to stop at the same damn place you just stopped. And
so definitely these moments of frustration. happen. You have to keep kind of poking and prodding and finding ways to make it continue.
Exactly. And this is where I was like, you stopped again. Please continue from. And then that's where I gave it the code. And it's like, sorry, here's the continuation of that, which it done successfully. Then I was like, yeah, okay, great. But I don't see where it actually sends it to ChatGPT through the API. And he was like, yeah, you're sorry, I missed that completely. Like, try this code for where it actually executes that. Like, this is getting confusing. Can you just provide full instructions on where to include or what file and what each file contains? It's like, sure, this is WP content plugins, LearnDash outline, ChatGPT folder. Inside that folder, create 2 PHP files. And here's what each file should contain. And then it gives me the full contents of each file. And I'm like, yeah, but you're missing out everything. So you can see here, it's like, add the code for sending the command to the ChatGPT API, add the code for parsing it. I'm like, I want the full code with everything in it. It's like, yeah, we can do that. It's like, you stopped, please continue. And I was like, I don't see where to have my ChatGPT API key. I was like, oops, I missed that. Here's how you register the settings page, add in the display, registering. And I was like, you need to update the ChatGPT client to use the newly saved API key, because before it was hard coded in the request. So it's like, oh yeah, you're right, I do need to update that. So it's like, hey, here's how you can get the API key. And I was like, yeah, I got a syntax error. And it was like, oops, yeah, I missed something, try this. And I was like, I have this syntax error, here's my full file. And this is where, when you get into debugging code with ChatGPT, you need to keep quoting its code back to it. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it just gets completely lost. I was like, this is my error, this is my file.
Which I actually think is similar to working with a developer too. You got to keep telling them, like, no, I see your code.
Right, exactly. And it's like, oh, sorry, I just missed a closing brace, which, as all developers know, missing a closing brace and missing a semicolon.
Pretty classic.
Is the classic of a developer.
Yeah.
And it's like, something's wrong. I have a course called test. I entered test as the course name to add lessons to. Instead, a new course was created, but no lessons were added to it at all. And it was like, oh, I think there's an issue with get page by title. And so it went through that, tried to update it. And I was like, I got a syntax error again. Here's my full file. And it's like, oh, I provided you with that function outside the class. Here's the fix. And I was like, I'm just confused by now. Just give me the full code. And so it again provides me with the full code for that file. I had to ask.
I'm always, while watching you go through this, I'm entertained both by your infinite persistence, and just because it's an AI, it also has infinite patience with you. It never gets frustrated that you're asking it to do anything.
So still asking it to continue. I think the most frustrating part using ChatGPT at the moment is its limit on the tokens when you're communicating. Yeah. Like, I just wanted to give me a full file that doesn't need to keep being stopped and started. Once that's like solved in the future, then it's extremely powerful, even more so than it is now. And it was like, yeah, but no lessons are created. Like, you just give me all this code, no lessons are created. And it was like, oh, I reviewed the code and I found that we didn't update the parse ChatGPT response. And so I updated that parser, and I was like, I think the ChatGPT response needs to be modified. This is what it currently is, which doesn't match the parser. And it was like, oh, yeah, we need to modify the same command to return JSON instead of just plain text. It's like, okay, that works. Tells me to update it. I'm like, here's my file. We go down. And then I was like, no lessons are being created. And then it's trying to debug its own code. It goes back and forth. It thinks it can fix it. It's like, no, doesn't work still. And then it's like, I think this is the issue. And I was like, this is my full code. I was like, no lessons are still added. I was like, oh, I had an oversight. The function returned null. Try this. It's like, that didn't work. Are you sure the parsing is saving? And it was like, I see a possible problem with the parsing. And that's where it gets really interesting, ChatGPT, when debugging. If you give it a slight suggestion, like if you have enough knowledge of how code works and functions, you can kind of give it a suggestion of like, I think this piece is wrong. You should go and review what you gave me to see if it's going to fix it. And so I'm like, are you sure parsing's saving and working correctly? It's like, let's try and modify that. It's like, no lessons. We should have some debug output to see what's going on. And it was like, yeah, we should do this. I was like, okay, so now I've got PHP warnings, which, and I've also got a pass response where you can see I got like 0 lessons created, no lesson titles. And there's like, something's going wrong with that. Try this. And I was like, okay, I get a 404 on that API. And this is where it gets really interesting. So it's like, as of my knowledge, my cutoff date in September 2021, the correct API URL is this. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's not. So this
that changed. Sorry.
I went off to OpenAI's docs, found the correct URL that it should be, and then just pasted that in. And I was like, okay, I pasted that in, but now I'm getting a 400 error. And then it's like, oh, I see you updated the API URL to the new version. But just now it told me it didn't know the new version existed. Now it's like, oh, the new version, I know about that. And this is where it gets really interesting because it pretends it doesn't know, but it tells me that the reason that I'm getting this error is because my data array is not set correctly. It's like, this is what it should be. And it's
Which
like,
is funny because it's got to just be making a logical conclusion and not actually having that information.
And it's weird though, because this is the exact model that's in the API AI docs. This is the exact thing. So it's almost as if it's pulling it and doing it, though in theory it can't do that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, this still isn't working. And it's like, oh, the stop field's a problem. We don't need that. I was like, but isn't that data array missing the prompt? Like now you just completely ignored the prompt. And it was like, oh yeah, sorry, like that's a mistake. Here's the updated prompt. And I was like, no, still getting a 400 error and this warning. And so we go back and forth a bit more. And I'm like, I'm just confused. Here's my code. Send me the full updated code. It does the ChatGPT class. And then I'm like, yeah, the response connects to the API, but it returns empty. I think it's related to our request form. This is the code. So I give it the code for the request form. And it's like, oh, it's returning an empty response, possibly because it's not providing the output based on the given prompt. In the send command, try this. And I'm like, yeah, PHP warning. And it's like, try this. I'm like, I think there's an issue with the order. This is the pass response. Gives me some more to try. I was like, okay, we're getting closer. The course was created, but no lessons are output. And it's like, oh, that's weird. It's empty. Let's try updating the command variable. And I was just like, no, that's dumb. We've been by this point.
So here's where it had an idea, but you're like, listen, your ideas aren't good. I need to redirect you back, right? I think that's kind of a close, approximation. And actually, Jack, I'm actually gonna pause you before you go any further. This ends up working. I'm just gonna leave a little bit of time for questions because we've got about 12 minutes left. So I'm gonna pause you. This is amazing. I think the persistence and the keeping it on the rails piece is really expressed in this longer example, which anybody who's trying to do this should remember that piece. But Addison, are you going to moderate questions? Should I just pull them from the Q&A? How do you want to handle this?
It's totally up to you. I am completely out of my element, so but I can read off the questions if you like, or if you just want to snag the ones that are most relevant, maybe to everyone.
I'll pull a few from the Q&A. Let's start with, so Bram Van Ost, sorry if I butchered your name. This probably means an explosion of plugins. How will LearnDash manage this? Avoiding having many ChatGPT developed plugins that creates a mess.
That's a good question. And I think the main answer to that is that you saw in the more polished prototype that we showed at the course outline, you saw that settings area, which is like a global AI settings area. And that's one of the key importances that I am stressing to the developers when we're looking at the AI is like, we don't want to just add a bajillion ChatGPT plugins. We want to add sensible AI functionality that helps people either do their work quicker, improves the quality of their work, and generally assist them. And that's why we've got that global AI setting. So we add key features to LearnDash core. Like, we don't want to be being like, hey, go and install these 5 ChatGPT plugins that each do this different thing. Like, the core of this code exists in LearnDash core for that very reason, to get around that. Oh, I got 10 ChatGPT plugins and they all do something different. They all communicate in different ways. We have that global class now in core that will power all the future of our AI integrations.
Exactly. So in this, using these 2 examples, we create a plugin to prototype the idea. And then when we decide, oh, this is actually an interesting idea we want to roll into the core product, then it goes, into our workflow, into our work cycle to get polished up, reviewed, integrated somewhere where it belongs, and it doesn't just become lots of little micro solutions.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Tom Brown asks, outside ChatGPT, what was your workflow? Were you using an external code editor like VS Code or something to compile the entire code set? How did you go from code in the chat box to testing it in WordPress?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And yeah, I did use VS Code. So literally just copied and pasted the code from ChatGPT into VS Code. On my desktop, I've got a folder, OpenAI plugins. So whenever I create a new plugin with ChatGPT, I just go in, create a new folder for that plugin, create the files, paste the code in, and then the very retro way of connecting to FTP to my test site to upload the plugin, and then I can modify it back and forth, because that gets really slow if you keep changing it locally, then updating it, and you're not integrated with Git or anything. So that's just a classic FTP change. So it wasn't too bad. It does get confusing sometimes, which is why you're like, hey, ChatGPT, just give me the full code, where it's like, edit these 10 files with all these functions. And it's like, I don't even know where we were. Like, just give me the full thing.
Yeah, that's great. Ryan Moore asks, is LearnDash recommending that customers start creating their own random plugins to add features to LearnDash? How do support and compatibility fit in? And I'm going to take just the first part of this, and then I want you to follow up. One of the beauties of WordPress is that anybody can create plugins for and add-ons and extensions to anything that exists. It's all open source. It's all GPL'd, and we do the best that we can to create hookable actions, filters, extendable functions, lots of things to make our products developer friendly to do that. Now, do a lot of customers do that? Some do, right? Some use developers to work on their products, and they create these things. We've got a very robust set of third-party integrators that build plugins and either sell or give them away for LearnDash. So that stuff exists today. That's not necessarily new. I do think that ChatGPT does lower the bar to that, and has a possibility of lots more people being able to do sort of exploratory work, not just with LearnDash, but with anything in WordPress, because it is so extensible.
Yeah, and I think, like, we see now in our Facebook group, we see people come in and are like, hey, I found this code on the developer documentation site, but I don't know how to get it working on my website. Like, ChatGPT is a really good example where you could take that code and have it build a plugin that's relatively simple, because you've given it the code and you're telling it what you want it to do. And you can get a working prototype that, you're not battling back and forth with, because, like, as the support team at LearnDash, we do a really great job of helping people out with all their LearnDash queries, but we don't custom code things for people. So this is a great way where if, like, the support team point you to documentation on a developer docs, it's like, here's the function you need. You can then take that, go to ChatGPT and be like, hey, I have this function. I need it to do this thing. And 9 times out of 10, you can get a pretty decent result from that, which for me is really interesting, to save that frustration of like, oh, I have this code, I'm not a developer, I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to get it onto my site. It doesn't work as I expected it to. And ChatGPT can just take that and get it working for you in no time.
And those are examples where we might send people to Codable or one of these other services where you're going to have to go, pay a developer to help you, which, we're not interested in putting developers out of work. What we're interested in is developers having their time to work on more complicated and more interesting problems rather than, the 45-minute task or half a day task that's sometimes hard to get somebody to really get locked in on. Tom Brown asks, as product owner, Jack is clearly an expert on the code base for LearnDash. Maybe not the code base, but definitely the way the product works. What is your thoughts about getting generalized to less experienced designers?
Yeah, I think, providing you, for reference, just so we can touch on the code base. I know the code base to an extent. I can play around with it. I do not know the code base anywhere near as well as our senior engineers do. Like, I'm the one that goes to them. It's like, hey, can you point me to this piece in the code? Because I want to take a look at it. They're like, yeah, sure, here it is. I know the product very well as the product owner of LearnDash. So I think even as if you've used LearnDash, even for a couple of months, you're familiar with how it works. It's really easy to take that and give it to ChatGPT and get something built. Like, you don't need to be an expert of experts in how LearnDash works or how it functions. You just need to be able to write a clear prompt for ChatGPT. And you don't need to know coding. It helps if you have a base understanding of prompts and what you can get it to do. It helps if you can tell it to debug itself and you kind of understand how it's doing that. You don't need to do that, but it speeds up the workflow. And I think that's the key point.
Agreed. We've had a couple sort of varied questions around, and also from the chat. And so I'm just kind of summarize this rather than directly ask the question, but where does, and this is philosophical, I don't think we have an answer for this question necessarily, but where does the AI end and the human course creator begin? I think that's one of those questions that we're all going to be dealing with as this explosion of AI really takes off. But I'm sort of curious, Jack, you're steeped in all of this and are an opinionated person. What do you think?
I think the key of AI is to help speed up and refine what a human creates and outputs. A key piece for me is, you see AI content all around the internet. You see AI content everywhere. AI generated written content is generally fine at a surface level unless you have a technical understanding of what it is. If you're a subject matter expert in that content, you can tear apart the AI written content in minutes. I've done that at LearnDash. I'm sure marketing will tell, they send me something, I'm like, yeah, but the product doesn't do that. We need to do it this way. And then I rewrite it based on what ChatGPT done. But it gives you that head start. It lets you get an outline. It lets you get an idea. And so I think if you look at AI with LearnDash, I think the outliner is a really good example. It can help you get that initial idea. I think there's some ideas I got in my head where it could help you refine an existing idea that you've already input. But I don't think it's a replacement for the subject matter expert that knows their content really well and can create a course and sell it to someone. There's also that human interaction element where a lot of people buy courses based on the community around the course, whether that's other students taking the course, whether that's through instructors helping them with the course, whether that's through exams and grading. And ChatGPT can't replace a human in that element, and it probably never can. It's not the same.
Yeah.
It's not the same talking to a bot as talking to a live instructor that's had the personal experience to help you through the question that you're stuck on.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it ends up coming back to critical thinking skills too, both in the way you interact with the AI and in kind of the key thing that we're trying to teach is to know enough about a subject area and to be deep enough in it that you can think critically about, what you're hearing, what you're reading, what you're seeing. And so I'll just wrap with one last question, which is, we saw one really cool AI feature. When's that coming to LearnDash, Jack? Soon?
Very, very soon. very, very soon.
Cool. And I don't think that's going to be the end. I think AI assistant in LearnDash is going to become a thing. We'll be playing with lots more concepts here. Thanks everybody for hanging out and listening to Jack and I ramble on about dev and courses and AI and our particular workflows and how this is disrupting the way we think about the world.
Thanks, everyone.